The first technique is something I like to call random flailing. There's no real strategy to this technique. You're basically just spasming uncontrollably, hoping to hit something. And this is definitely something everybody has done in Half Sword before, especially since some people may not realize that Half Sword allows you to use a lot of real techniques to improve your gameplay. But of course, since you're randomly flailing about, you're leaving yourself open to counterattacks. With no real defense, it's really easy to get clobbered, so it's really a coin flip on whether you're going to win or not. And that's why I'm giving it a 2 out of 5 for effectiveness. Of course, anybody's able to use this technique because it's so easy. That's why I'm giving it a 3 on the usefulness scale, a 1 on the difficulty scale, and also it doesn't look that cool, so I'm giving it a 1 on the coolness scale as well. The next technique is half swording. This is when you have one hand on the handle and the other hand on the blade of the sword, allowing you to control the point more easily. For effectiveness, I'm going to have to give it a 5 out of 5. It is the best way to use a sword in armored combat. Otherwise, you'd just be slapping them with your sword. For usefulness, I'm only going to be able to give it a 3, and that's because this is only really good for armored combat. When you don't have armor, the more important thing to worry about is reach. Now don't get me wrong, it's still very usable, but it becomes a little bit more situational when you don't have any armor on. For coolness, we're going to have to give it a 3.5, and that's because you can't do anything flashy. You can still do cold, calculated attacks that look very nice. You can also do some cool grappling moves with half sword, which is another added benefit. For difficulty, we're only going to give it a 2 because the only thing really difficult would be getting the sword into the cracks of the armor, which can be difficult at times, but with a little bit of practice, it becomes a lot easier. The next technique is called the spin kick, also known as the roundhouse kick. And right off the bat, we have to give this one a 5 out of 5 for coolness. Honestly, I don't think anything can be cooler than ending a fight with a swift roundhouse kick to the head. Sadly, those one-kick fights don't happen very often, and people increase the damage done to bots to make the fight end in a single kick. With normal damage, the fights rarely end like this. Most of the time, it takes 2 or 3 kicks to even down the opponent, and they don't even give up. That's why I'm giving it a ranking of 3 for effectiveness and a ranking of 2 for usefulness, because you can only really use it in an unarmed fight. Once your opponent has a weapon, this move becomes basically useless. And even if you could use this move without getting hurt, why not just stab them with your weapon? It's much more efficient. For difficulty, we're going to give it a 3 out of 5. Since learning this can be pretty difficult because you need to learn timing and proper footwork, but once you get that down and increase your sensitivity all the way, it becomes easy to pull it off pretty consistently. Oh, and you're going to get knocked out a bunch while trying this. The next technique is using guards. And if you don't know what guards are, they're basically positions you hold your weapon to block off lines of attack from your enemy or to prepare an attack. Now, just using one guard isn't going to save you. Many of the cuts and attacks from your enemy are going to get past your guard, which is why I give the effectiveness a 4 out of 5. But what guards do give you is a base to work from, setting you up for some great parry riposts, counterattacks, stop cuts, and any other attack that you can think of, which is why I'm rating it 5 out of 5 for usefulness. For the coolness scale, I'm going to have to give it a 4 out of 5, and that's because it is a realistic sword fighting technique, and it just makes it that much cooler. Now for difficulty, we're only going to give it a 2, and that's because it's really easy to use guards. Once you understand the different guards, it's very easy to go from there. And if you guys want to see all the different basic German longsword fencing guards, I have a video on it right here. The next technique is throwing your weapon. And unless you've just killed your enemy, you're now defenseless, which is why I'm only giving it a 1 out of 5. But if you do happen to hit your enemy, it can do quite a bit of damage. That's why I'm giving it a 2 for effectiveness. For coolness, we have to give it a 3, because you could either hit your opponent and it would look really cool, or you would miss and keep missing and run around and get chased by him and that wouldn't be very cool at all. Now for difficulty, I was going to rate this a 5, until I realized it's quite a bit easier in first person. Oh, don't mind that, it's just scratching my femoral artery. The next technique is what we're going to call wrestling, and that would include any grappling, throwing, hugging, pinning, choking, whatever this is, and this. All of these things can be pretty effective if used right, which is why I'm giving it a 3 out of 5 for effectiveness. For usefulness, we're only going to be able to give it a 2.5, and that's because once you're on the ground, it's basically any man's game as to who can win. Also, this is very situational when you want to grab your opponent and wrestle them to the ground. Now, occasionally, this can end up looking pretty cool, like something straight out of WWE, but most of the time, wrestling is just going to end up looking stupid, and you're not going to be sure what's going on. For difficulty, we're going to give this a 3. It does take some real skill to handle men on the ground, but it's not that overcomplicated that people can't do it whenever they want to, but it is hard to be decisive when you're just thrashing about. Now, I did have to separate grabbing and wrestling because grabbing is more just grabbing somebody's arm to disable them from attacking you with it. And since using this technique, I found that it's been surprisingly effective. After immobilizing one of your opponent's hands, you're able to attack them unrelentlessly with your other arm. And it's been so effective that I haven't lost a single match while doing this yet. So of course we have to give it a 5 out of 5. Now, I thought for sure that this was only going to be the case for unarmed fights, but when I used this technique with weapons, it still worked so well, which is why I have to give it a 5 out of 5 for usefulness. For coolness, I'm only going to go 2. Most of the time, grabbing them and whacking them doesn't look so cool. It does have its moments, though. Now, originally, I was only going to give the difficulty 1, but in armed combat, you kind of need to parry first in order for it to be safe to grab the enemy's arm, so we're going to give it a 2. You also have to be careful about pulling the enemy's weapon into yourself, which, that's what ended up killing me, funny enough. Next are the forbidden techniques, which I discovered only by chance, which are so powerful that if they get in the wrong hands, it could be devastating. And that is the Drunkard's Guard, which can be very lethal. And Reverse Grip, which strikes fear into the hearts of your enemies so that they are unable to move. But these techniques are among the hardest to master. Of course, they're the most efficient and useful techniques, as well as being the coolest. The next technique is hacking. Now, hacking is very effective, allowing you to kill enemies instantly, become invulnerable, and use whatever armor and weapons you want, allowing you to crush enemies. Now, it is pretty fun to do all these things, but after a while, it does get a bit boring. And that's why I'm only giving it a 2 on the coolness scale. And this technique is not very difficult. There's plenty of tutorials on how to mod, so it's really not that hard. Now, the last technique we're going to go over today is teabagging. Now, teabagging is very effective in half sword. It's very important to assert your dominance and show a display of good sportsmanship. It's also very useful, and of course, it's very cool. Now, luckily, it's pretty easy to do it in half sword.